The last time I held a gun to my chest, a clock on the wall was counting down from 12 seconds, and my son-in-law was deciding whether my daughter would live or die. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, to the moment the first gear clicked out of place, and my entire life began to unwind like a broken mainspring. A clock does not lie. It cannot. Every gear, every spring, every jewel bearing serves a singular mechanical truth. I spent 50 years of my life believing that about people too. I was wrong. My name is Theodore Blackwell. People in Memphis call me Teddy. For 5 decades, I repaired antique timepieces in a small shop on South Main Street, coaxing life back into mechanisms that most people had given up for dead. I thought retirement meant quiet mornings and slow coffee on the porch. Instead, it meant standing over an empty grave, while the Tennessee wind carried away every truth I thought I knew. The afternoon they buried my wife. The sky over Elmwood Cemetery was the color of a bruise, a deep purple gray that pressed down on the mourners like a physical weight. The old magnolias lining the gravel paths swayed with a low, mournful creak, and the scent of fresh-turned earth mixed with the sickly sweetness of funeral lilies, until every breath I took felt like swallowing something rotten. The red Tennessee clay clung to my shoes like it was trying to pull me down into the ground alongside the mahogany casket. Rosalind Blackwell. My Roz. 68 years old. The woman who ran the little bookshop on Beale Street with a quiet smile and ink-stained fingers. The woman who hummed hymns while she shelved first editions and who could not sleep without the sound of my pocket watch ticking on the nightstand. She was gone. A heart attack, they said. Swift and merciless, like a clock spring snapping without warning. I stood alone at the edge of the grave after the last mourner drifted toward the parking lot. The minister had spoken his words, and they had evaporated into the humid autumn air like steam from a cooling engine. I watched the cemetery workers prepare to lower the casket, their movements mechanical and indifferent, and I felt the distinct sensation of a mechanism inside my own chest, grinding to a halt. That is when Clement Hargrove appeared. He materialized from behind a weathered granite obelisk, like a shadow given reluctant form. 61 years old, skin like cracked walnut from decades under the Tennessee sun, Clement had been the head groundskeeper at Elmwood for as long as anyone could remember. I had nodded to him at a dozen funerals over the years without ever exchanging more than a word about the weather. But today, his eyes were different. Wide, frantic, scanning the retreating crowd with the desperate vigilance of a man carrying a secret too heavy for his bones. Mr. Blackwell. His voice was a dry scrape, barely louder than the wind through the magnolia leaves. He gripped my forearm with surprising force, his calloused fingers digging into the fabric of my suit jacket. Do not leave yet. Please, Clement. This is not the time. I tried to pull away, but his hand was an anchor, rooting me to the muddy grass. He leaned closer, and I caught the sharp scent of tobacco and something else, something chemical and old, like the preservative they use on leather book bindings. His free hand fumbled inside the breast pocket of his faded work shirt, and when it emerged, it held 2 objects that would dismantle my world. The first was a small brass key, cold and worn smooth by years of patient waiting. The second was a pocket watch, silver, Swiss movement, 19th century, if my trained eye was correct, and it was silent. Completely, unnaturally still. No tick, no mechanical heartbeat, just dead weight in his weathered palm. She paid me 15 years ago to hold these for this exact day, Clement whispered, pressing both objects into my hands with a trembling urgency. The watch and the key. She said, when you hold them together, you will hear the truth start ticking again. I stared at him, certain the grief had finally cracked something fundamental in the world around me. Clement, what are you talking about? My wife is in that box. His eyes darted toward the parking lot, toward the cluster of black vehicles where my daughter Naomi was being guided into an SUV by her husband Julian. Then he looked back at me, and the words he spoke next drove a spike of ice straight through the center of my chest. That coffin is empty, Mr. Blackwell. She paid me to bury air. Do not go home. Go to the storage facility on Highway 51, Unit 24. Right now, before the man in the black suit realizes what I have given you. Before I could respond, before I could grab his collar and demand an explanation, Clement released my arm and retreated into the shadow of the obelisk with the practiced silence of a man who had spent his life among the dead. He vanished between the headstones like smoke dissipating into fog, leaving me alone with a stopped watch, a cold key, and a grave that suddenly felt like the biggest lie I had ever been told. I looked down at the silver pocket watch in my palm. It was beautiful. Patek Philippe, mid-1800s, hand-engraved case with a floral motif I recognized as Victorian mourning jewelry style. A timepiece meant to mark death, and it was completely silent. Every mechanism has a point of failure. I had spent 50 years finding them in other people's clocks. Now, I was standing at the edge of my own, the weight of the watch and the key pressed into my skin like a brand. I closed my fingers around them, feeling the cold metal bite into my flesh, and turned toward the parking lot. Julian Voss was standing beside the black SUV, one hand resting on the small of Naomi's back, the other adjusting his cufflink. He looked up and caught my eye across the gravel path. He smiled, a warm, practiced, perfectly calibrated smile that I had trusted for 10 years. But a clockmaker knows when a mechanism is running too smoothly. And in that moment, with the dead watch burning in my fist, I saw something I had never noticed before. Julian was not grieving. He was monitoring. His hand tightened on my daughter's back, and I watched him guide her into the vehicle with the efficient precision of a man completing a scheduled task. The door closed. The engine started. And as the SUV pulled away, Julian's eyes found mine one last time through the tinted glass. They were not the eyes of a mourning son-in-law. They were the eyes of a man checking a clock. I did not move. The gravel beneath my shoes felt like wet concrete, fixing me to the spot where Clement's words had rewritten the laws of my universe. The SUV carrying my daughter had barely cleared the cemetery gate when footsteps crunched behind me. Measured, deliberate. The cadence of a man who calculates every stride. Pups. Julian's voice hit my back like a warm hand pressing against a cold wound. I turned, and there he was. He had not left with the vehicle after all. He must have stepped out while I was watching the taillights disappear, circling back with the silent efficiency of a predator who never truly leaves the perimeter. Julian Voss. 35 years old. Investment strategist, with a jaw carved from expensive marble and eyes the color of polished obsidian. His charcoal suit cost more than my first car, and his shoes were immaculate despite the red Tennessee mud surrounding us. A man who walks through filth without getting dirty has practiced the route. You have been standing here a long time, Pops. His hand landed on my shoulder with the precise weight of manufactured comfort. Let me drive you home. Naomi is worried. I felt the pocket watch and key pressing against my thigh. My hand instinctively covered the pocket. I am fine, Julian. Just need another minute with her. He studied me. Not looked. Studied. The way a jeweler examines a stone under magnification, searching for the internal flaw that determines its value. His dark eyes moved across my face with a sweep that felt clinical. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt like a specimen rather than a father-in-law. Of course. He squeezed my shoulder. Take all the time you need. I will make sure Naomi eats something. She has not touched food since yesterday. There it was. The subtle redirect. The caretaker's language that positioned him as the essential gatekeeper between me and my own daughter. He had been doing it for years, I realized. Small adjustments to the family mechanism that ensured every interaction with Naomi passed through his hands first. A watchmaker would call it regulating the escapement, controlling the rate at which information flows through the system. Julian. I watched his face for the micro-expression. Did Roz ever mention anything to you? About a storage unit? Or a key? Not a flicker. Not a single misaligned muscle. He tilted his head with gentle concern so perfectly executed, it might as well have been rehearsed. Pops, you are in shock. Grief makes us grasp at strange thoughts. Let me take you home. I nodded, forcing my jaw to unclench. Go ahead. Tell Naomi I will be there within the hour. He held my gaze for 1 second too long. A single extra tick of hesitation. But I was a man who measured time for a living. That extra second was a confession. He smiled, patted my shoulder twice with mechanical precision, and walked away. I watched until he disappeared around the chapel wall before I allowed myself to breathe. I made it to my truck on borrowed legs. The cab smelled of old leather and machine oil. I locked the doors, gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles screamed white, and pulled the stopped pocket watch from my pocket. The silence from within it felt louder than any ticking I had ever heard. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Naomi's name. A message that dropped the temperature inside the cab by 10 degrees. Dad. Come home alone. Need to talk. Just you. I stared at those words until they blurred. In 32 years, my daughter had never once called me Dad. From her first words, I was Daddy. At 16, Papa. Even now, as a 32-year-old emergency physician who held dying strangers together for a living, she still whispered Papa when no one else was listening. It was our private mechanism, a tiny gear connecting only us. Dad. 3 cold letters. A linguistic fracture that screamed louder than any alarm. This message was not from my daughter. It was a leash being tested, checking whether the old man would walk straight into whatever mechanism had been set to receive him. A clock does not panic. It simply moves to the next second. I set my phone face down and turned to the envelope Clement had pressed upon me. Old. Yellowed. Sealed with unmarked wax. The paper smelled of camphor and thyme, as if it had been sleeping inside a cedar chest for years, waiting for precisely this afternoon. I broke the seal. Inside, a single sheet of heavy cream stationery covered in handwriting I would recognize in a pitch-black room. Roz's script. Elegant. Sloping left. With distinctive cross T's like tiny swords. My eyes found the first line, and the stopped clock inside my chest lurched violently back to life. Teddy, if you are reading this, my death was the only way to start the clock that saves our daughter. Do not go home. Do not trust the man at her side. He has been counting down to her death for 10 years, and tomorrow is 0. I am alive. Come find me, Unit 24, and bring the watch. When it starts ticking again, you will understand everything. I read those words 3 times. Each reading drove them deeper like nails hammered into a beam. The woman I had mourned for 3 days, whose cold hand I had touched through the viewing glass, was telling me she was alive, and the man who married my daughter was her executioner. I looked at the stopped watch, the letter, the brass key. 3 pieces of a puzzle I had not known existed 20 minutes ago. When a mechanism fails, you do not smash it. You trace the fault line back to its origin. I was not going home. I was going to Unit 24, and I was going to find out what kind of bomb had been ticking inside my family for a decade. I turned the key in the ignition and the engine growled to life, drowning the cemetery silence beneath a sound that felt almost defiant. The letter sat on the passenger seat like a living thing, Roz's handwriting pulsing under the fading afternoon light. I had read the first paragraph 3 times already, but the rest of the page waited with the patient menace of a coiled spring. I pulled onto the cemetery road, heading north toward the interstate, and let my eyes steal glances at the page between stretches of empty asphalt. The second paragraph was longer, more detailed, written in a hand that was steadier than the first, as if Roz had composed it over multiple sittings, choosing each word with the mechanical precision I recognized from her bookshop inventory lists. Teddy, I know you have questions that feel like they could split you open. I owe you answers, but time is the one currency I cannot waste tonight. What you need to know is this: Julian Voss is not who he claims to be. His real name is Julian Cray. He is the biological son of Desmond Cray, the man I helped put in a federal penitentiary 28 years ago. Everything about him, the name, the career, the charm, the love he shows our daughter, is a manufactured identity designed for one purpose: revenge. He married Naomi to destroy us from the inside, and he has been waiting for the 25th anniversary of his father's sentencing to complete the job. That date is tomorrow. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator without conscious permission. The truck surged forward, eating the highway in hungry gulps. Desmond Cray. The name detonated in my memory. Like a depth charge disturbing waters I had believed were still for decades. Memories are like watch movements sealed behind a crystal case. You can see them turning, but you cannot touch them until someone pries the back open. I gripped the steering wheel as the past came flooding through the breach. It was a Tuesday night in the spring of 1998. 2 years after whatever had happened with this Cray business that I did not yet know about. Roz and I were sitting at our kitchen table on Carr Avenue, the old house with the creaking porch and the magnolia tree that dropped blossoms into the gutters every April. Naomi was 2 years old, asleep upstairs in her crib with the mobile of paper stars turning slowly above her head. The kitchen smelled of chamomile tea and the faint chemical trace of the bookbinding glue Roz always carried on her fingertips. She had been quiet for days. Not the comfortable quiet of a woman reading, but the compressed silence of a spring wound too tight. That night, she set her tea down with both hands flat on the table and looked at me with eyes I had never seen before. Hard, ancient, operational. Teddy. I did not spend my years in Washington cataloging library archives for the Smithsonian. She said it without blinking. I was Secret Service, Protective Intelligence Division. I spent 18 months embedded inside a criminal financial network called the Syndicate, posing as a forensic accountant to document their money laundering operations. My testimony and the evidence I gathered put 12 men in federal prison, including their leader, a man named Desmond Cray. I remembered the way the kitchen light had flickered at that moment, a coincidence that felt like punctuation. I remembered the taste of cold chamomile on my tongue and the sound of Naomi's breathing through the baby monitor, fragile and oblivious. I remembered asking the only question that mattered. Are we safe? Roz had reached across the table and taken my hands. Her fingers were warm, but they trembled almost imperceptibly. A vibration I recognized now as the tremor of a wound clock fighting against its own tension. It is over, Teddy. The syndicate is dismantled. Cray is in Supermax with no possibility of parole. I left the service when I was pregnant with Naomi. They think I am just a footnote in the case files. A number. We are safe. I chose us. I had believed her. For 26 years, I had wrapped that belief around my family like a protective case around a delicate movement, never suspecting that the spring inside was still coiled, still storing energy, still waiting for the exact moment of maximum tension to release. The highway stretched before me now, the orange Tennessee sunset bleeding across the windshield like a wound. I returned to the letter, reading the final section while the road hummed beneath my wheels. I never truly left Teddy. I could not. The service kept me as a classified consultant, because the syndicate's network was too vast to die with one arrest. I monitored them from our home, from the bookshop, from the quiet corners of our life that you thought were simply mine. 2 years ago, I discovered that Desmond Cray had been running an operation from inside his cell for over 2 decades. An operation with one target. Us. Julian is his weapon. A boy raised from childhood to infiltrate, marry, and eventually eliminate our daughter on the anniversary of his father's imprisonment. I could not tell you because your grief had to be real. Julian has been watching us for years. If your pain at my funeral was anything less than genuine, he would have known immediately and accelerated his timeline. I am sorry, Teddy. Your broken heart was the only shield I could give our girl. Come to Unit 24. Agent Vivian Cross will meet you at the gate. Bring the watch. It belongs to Desmond Cray. I took it from evidence 28 years ago as insurance. Julian does not know it exists. It is the key to everything. I set the letter down on the seat with hands that belonged to an earthquake. The pocket watch suddenly felt radioactive against my thigh. It was not just a timepiece. It was evidence. A relic of the monster whose son was currently driving my daughter toward whatever 0 hour meant. The exit for Highway 51 appeared in the dimming light like a summons. I pulled off the interstate, the truck rattling over the expansion joints with a rhythmic thud that matched the frantic drumming in my chest. The road narrowed, passing through a corridor of industrial decay. Rusted fences, abandoned lots, the smell of river mud and diesel creeping through the vents. A clock only stops for 2 reasons. The spring breaks, or someone holds the pendulum. Roz had been holding the pendulum of our lives for 28 years, and I had never once noticed the silence where the ticking should have been. The storage complex materialized through the dusk like a fortress of corrugated steel. Highway 51 Self-Storage. The sign was half-lit, buzzing with an electrical stutter that reminded me of a dying pulse. I pulled into the gravel lot, the tires crunching like teeth grinding together, and killed the engine. There, leaning against a dark sedan near the primary gate, stood a woman, mid-40s, sharp-featured, with a posture that communicated absolute authority, compressed into absolute stillness. Her jacket was cut to conceal a shoulder holster, and the badge clipped to her belt caught the last light of the dying sun with a deliberate metallic flash. She did not wave. She did not smile. She simply watched me approach with the patient, predatory focus of someone who had been counting the seconds until my arrival. The stopped watch in my pocket remained silent. But something inside me, some mechanism deeper than logic, told me it would not stay quiet much longer. "You are late, Mr. Blackwell." Her voice carried the flat authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without repetition. She did not offer a handshake. I stepped out of the truck, the gravel shifting beneath my weight like loose teeth. The evening air was heavy with river moisture and the metallic tang of industrial rust. I could hear the distant hum of high-voltage lines overhead, a persistent electrical drone that felt like the facility itself was vibrating at some frequency just below human tolerance. Agent Vivian Cross. She flashed a badge with a practiced flick that lasted exactly long enough for recognition, but not study. 48 years old, if I had to guess. Sharp cheekbones, close-cropped hair, and a jawline that looked engineered for delivering bad news without flinching. She moved like a woman who had cataloged every exit within 30 seconds of entering any space. She said you would be carrying the watch. Cross noted, her gaze dropping to the slight bulge in my trouser pocket, and that you would look like a man who just discovered his foundation was built on sand. She was right on both counts. Where is she? I did not frame it as a question. It came out as a demand, raw and cracked at the edges. Cross turned without answering and began walking into the facility. The rows of corrugated steel units stretched before us like the ribs of some enormous industrial beast, each one identical, each one hiding whatever secrets people could not keep in their homes. Our footsteps echoed in the narrow aisles, and the last orange light of sunset bled off the metal walls in streaks that looked like old blood. "This complex is under federal contract," she said without looking back. "Classified relocations. Your wife has been operating from this location for 14 months. She paused at an intersection of aisles, scanning both directions before proceeding. "The syndicate has surveillance capabilities that would make most tech companies envious. We have been running counter-surveillance on this facility around the clock. Looped cameras, signal jamming, the works. As far as the outside world knows, this is just a place where people store old furniture." "How long has she been here?" I asked, my breath coming in short, controlled bursts. "Long enough to miss you," Cross replied. "And long enough to know exactly how dangerous tonight is going to be for everyone involved." We stopped at a unit that looked identical to every other. Same corrugated steel door. Same industrial padlock. Same anonymity. But when Cross nodded toward the lock, I felt the brass key in my pocket pulse against my thigh like a second heartbeat. I pulled it out. The metal was warm now, heated by my body through the fabric, and it slid into the padlock with a click that sounded far too final for such a small mechanism. The lock released. I gripped the handle, and then I felt it. A vibration. Barely perceptible. Coming from the pocket watch in my other hand, I pulled it out and held it to my ear, certain I was imagining things, certain grief and adrenaline had conspired to manufacture a phantom sensation. But no. There it was. Faint. Rhythmic. Impossible. Tick. 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 The stopped watch was running. After 15 years of silence in Clement's keeping, the mechanism had woken without any visible intervention, as if the proximity to this door had completed some circuit I could not see. I am a rational man. I have spent 50 years understanding the physics of escapements and balance wheels. Watches do not start themselves, and yet this one was ticking against my palm with the steady confidence of a heart that had merely been holding its breath. I lifted the door. The space inside was not a storage unit. It was a command center. 3 large monitors lined the left wall, each displaying live surveillance feeds. I recognized one immediately. Our neighborhood on Carr Avenue. The magnolia tree in our front yard, swaying in real-time wind. Another showed what appeared to be a federal prison interior. The third displayed a suburban street I did not recognize. Children's bicycles visible on a manicured lawn. A tactical map of Memphis covered the right wall. Red pins connected by string in patterns that looked like a disease spreading across the city. File boxes stamped with federal classification markers were stacked beneath a metal desk. The air smelled of fresh coffee and toner ink and something else, something alive and warm that did not belong in a steel box. Then she stepped out from behind the bank of monitors. My knees did not buckle immediately. That would come in a moment. First, there was the pure sensory shock of seeing a dead woman breathe. Rosalind Blackwell stood in the blue glow of the screens with a posture I had never seen in 45 years of marriage. Straight-backed, shoulders squared, chin lifted at an angle that communicated tactical readiness rather than the soft, bookish slouch I had loved for decades. She was wearing dark tactical clothing instead of the linen blouses she favored at the shop. Her reading glasses were gone. Her eyes, without them, looked sharper, harder, younger. She was alive. Impossibly, magnificently, terrifyingly alive. Brooks. No. Teddy. She corrected herself, and that correction broke something inside me. She had almost used her operational voice before remembering she was speaking to her husband. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Then my knees went. The relief was a physical force, a wave of such overwhelming magnitude that my body simply refused to support its weight. She moved fast. Faster than a 68-year-old bookshop owner should be capable of moving, catching my arm and guiding me toward a folding chair. Her hands were warm and real and strong, and the scent of her was the same, lavender and old paper and the faintest trace of Earl Grey. But beneath it was something new. Gun oil, printer toner, the cold chemical smell of a life lived in shadows. You were dead. I managed, my voice belonging to a stranger. I held your hand through the glass, Roz. It was cold. I felt the absence of your pulse. She knelt before me, her hands gripping mine with a fierceness that contradicted the clinical calm of her eyes. The body in the casket was provided by the Bureau, a cadaver from their forensic program prepared to pass a viewing. Your grief had to be real, Teddy. Julian has been monitoring your biometrics through the smart home system for years. Heart rate, sleep patterns, phone activity. If your morning had shown a single irregularity, he would have accelerated his timeline, and Naomi would already be gone. You used my heartbreak as a weapon. I whispered. She did not flinch. I used your love as a shield. There is a difference, even if it does not feel like one right now. I looked at her, this stranger wearing my wife's face, and felt the impossible coexistence of gratitude and rage spinning inside me like two gears turning in opposite directions within the same mechanism. The pocket watch in my hand ticked steadily, a metronome counting the seconds of this new reality. Roz stood, her face shifting back to operational hardness, and turned toward the wall of monitors. The blue light washed over her features as she pulled up a new screen. "I need to show you what Julian really is," she said, "and why tomorrow is the day he has been waiting for his entire life." The monitor flickered to life with a cold blue intensity that turned the corrugated walls into the inside of an aquarium. Roz's fingers moved across the keyboard with a speed that belonged to a woman half her age, pulling up files and surveillance photographs in a cascading sequence that felt like watching someone dismantle a bomb by revealing its wiring one connection at a time. A timeline appeared on screen. It started in 1996 and stretched to the present day. 28 years of data points connected by thin red lines that pulsed like veins carrying poison through a body. At the far left was a mugshot I did not recognize. A man in his mid-30s with a shaved head and eyes that held the flat, reptilian patience of something that waits in tall grass. Desmond Cray. Roz said his name, the way a surgeon names a tumor. Founder and financial architect of the syndicate. Convicted on 47 federal counts, including racketeering, money laundering, and ordering the execution of 3 informants. Sentenced to life without parole at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. He has been in a cell for 25 years tomorrow. She clicked forward. A new photograph appeared. A child, 7 years old, maybe 8, small for his age, with dark hair cut short and a face that showed absolutely nothing. No fear, no confusion, no tears. He sat on a metal folding chair in what appeared to be a federal processing room, his hands folded in his lap with a composure that made my skin crawl. Children are not supposed to be that still. "This is Julian," Roz said. "Taken the night of the raid. November 14th, 1996. I was there, Teddy. I was part of the team that entered Cray's compound in Nashville. When we breached the office, we found this boy sitting in the corner. His father was being dragged out in handcuffs 10 feet away, and this child did not make a sound. He just watched. He watched and he memorized every face in that room." She paused, and I saw something flicker across her features. Not quite guilt. Something older. The residual ache of a decision made decades ago that still sends tremors through the present. "I signed the paperwork that put him into the foster system," she continued, her voice dropping to a register I had never heard. "I thought I was saving him, giving him a clean slate, a chance to become someone other than his father's son. Instead, I gave him the perfect cover to disappear, change his name, and spend the next 20 years becoming the exact weapon Desmond designed him to be." She clicked again. The timeline advanced. Photographs appeared in sequence. Julian at 12, 14, 18. Each image sourced from different databases, school records, DMV files, employment histories. A progression that showed a boy being systematically assembled into a man. The early photos showed the same flat, observant eyes. But by his 20s, something had changed. He had learned to smile. The later photographs showed warmth, charm, the easy confidence of a man people instinctively trust. It was a mask grown so perfectly over the original face that even the seams had disappeared. Cray ran the operation from his cell. Cross interjected from behind us. She had entered silently and now stood near the door with her arms folded. Encrypted communications through his legal counsel. Dead drops through approved visitors. He spent 20 years shaping that boy into a guided missile aimed directly at your family. Every meeting was engineered. Roz pulled up a surveillance photograph that stopped my breath. It showed Naomi at 20, laughing at a coffee shop on Beale Street. And there, 2 tables behind her, watching with that calculated warmth, was Julian. 3 years before they officially met, He studied her patterns for 3 years before he made first contact. Roz said. Her running route, her favorite restaurants, the hospital where she did her residency. He knew her coffee order before he ever said hello. When they finally met at that charity fundraiser in 2011, Naomi thought it was fate. It was engineering. I felt bile rise in my throat. The taste was metallic and old, like biting down on a corroded gear. 13 years. He had been orbiting my daughter for 13 years. 3 years of surveillance. 3 years of dating. 7 years of marriage. Every anniversary dinner. Every Christmas morning. Every time he had sat across from me at my own table and called me Pops with that easy grin. All of it was a schematic. A blueprint for demolition disguised as a floor plan for a home. Every birthday. I heard myself whisper. Every time he held her hand in front of me. Roz turned from the monitor. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was steel. Every single moment was a countdown, Teddy. He was not living with her. He was waiting. Accumulating access. Building trust so complete that when the moment came, no one would question the accident. Accident. The word tasted like ash. Cross stepped forward and placed a document on the desk. I recognized the format immediately. An insurance policy. $12 million in coverage. Naomi Blackwell Voss listed as the insured. Julian Voss listed as sole beneficiary. Effective date. 3 years ago. He has been testing methods for 18 months. Cross said. Her voice clinical. Near-miss car incidents. A gas leak in their kitchen. That fire services attributed to an aging valve. A prescription mix-up at the pharmacy that put Naomi in the emergency room for 48 hours. Each one designed to look like an accident. Each one a rehearsal. The information hit me in layers. Each one heavier than the last, compressing my chest until I could barely pull air into my lungs. My daughter had been living inside a mechanism designed to kill her, and she had mistaken its ticking for the comfortable rhythm of a happy marriage. Why tomorrow? I asked, though I already felt the answer forming in the dark space behind my ribs. Roz pointed to the timeline. The end point. Tomorrow's date circled in red with a single notation beneath it. 25th anniversary of sentencing. She said. Desmond Cray does not just want revenge, Teddy. He wants poetry. He wants our daughter to die on the exact date his freedom was taken. He has waited 25 years for this specific sunrise, and Julian has been programmed since childhood to deliver it. I looked at the stopped mugshot of Desmond Cray on the screen, those flat reptilian eyes staring back at me across nearly 3 decades of patient, festering hatred. Then I looked at the surveillance photo of Julian sitting 2 tables behind my unsuspecting daughter, and I understood with a sickening clarity that the man I had welcomed into my family was not a person at all. He was a clock, set by his father, wound by hatred, and ticking towards 0. The pocket watch in my hand beat steadily against my palm. Tick, tick, tick. A rhythm that now sounded less like a heartbeat and more like a countdown I was already losing. Cross reached into a leather satchel near the door and slid a glossy surveillance photograph across the metal desk. The image cut through what remained of my composure like a shard of broken glass, pushed slowly into soft tissue. Julian Voss stood in the driveway of a modest colonial home. He was wearing a faded university sweatshirt and jeans, relaxed in a way I had never seen in 10 years of family dinners. No tailored suit, no polished obsidian eyes calculating the room. He looked almost human. Beside him stood a woman with auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her hand resting on his arm with the easy familiarity of long-established love. And gripping Julian's other hand, looking up at him with an expression of pure, uncomplicated adoration, was a boy. 7 years old. Dark hair, high forehead, the same inquisitive tilt of the head that Julian used when pretending to listen to my stories about antique timepieces. The resemblance was a punch delivered without warning. This was taken 6 weeks ago, Cross said, her voice maintaining that flat, clinical tone that I was beginning to understand, was a form of professional mercy, a way of delivering catastrophic information without adding emotional weight to the detonation. Nashville, a neighborhood called Sylvan Park. The woman is Serena Voss. Legal marriage certificate. Filed in Davidson County 4 years before he married your daughter. The boy is their son. I opened my mouth, but nothing emerged. The mechanism of speech had simply seized, gears locked against gears in a grinding paralysis. Roz continued where Cross left off, her back still turned toward the monitors. He has maintained a parallel life for the entire duration of his marriage to Naomi. Every business trip, every conference in another city, every emergency that called him away from Sunday dinner, he was not working. He was going home. To his real home. The word real landed like a mallet striking a bell. It rang through the hollow space inside my chest and kept ringing. A sustained tone of devastation that refused to decay. 10 years. A decade of holidays where he had excused himself to make work calls that were actually bedtime stories for another child. A decade of shared meals at my table while another woman set another table 200 miles away, believing herself to be his only wife. He is not just a mole, Cross said. He is a bigamist, maintaining a documented, active second life that your daughter knows nothing about. I gripped the edge of the metal desk, the cold surface biting into my palms. The boy, I managed. How does the boy connect to the operation? Cross exchanged a glance with Roz. The kind of look that passes between people who have debated how much truth a man can absorb before his structural integrity gives way completely. Desmond Cray knows about Caleb, Roz said, finally turning from the screens. Her face was grim in the blue light. He has always known. The boy is not just Julian's son. He is Desmond's leverage, his insurance policy against defection, if Julian ever hesitated. If he ever showed mercy to our family or attempted to abandon the mission, the syndicate has operatives positioned within minutes of that Nashville house. The threat is explicit. Complete the assignment or watch your own child die. The mechanism of the trap revealed itself in its full, horrifying symmetry. Julian was not simply a weapon aimed at my daughter. He was a weapon being held at gunpoint himself, forced to fire by the threat of his own child's destruction. A clock does not choose to strike the hour. It is compelled by the tension of its spring. And Julian's spring was a 7-year-old boy who did not know his father was a monster because his father was too busy being a monster to someone else's family. What is the boy's name? I asked. Though some part of me already sensed the answer approaching like a train whose headlight you can see, but whose arrival you cannot stop. Cross hesitated. Roz did not. Theodore, she said. He named him Theodore. The room tilted. Not physically, but in that way reality shifts when a piece of information rearranges everything you thought you understood about another human being. Julian Voss, the man who had spent a decade executing a plan to destroy my family, had named his only son after me. After the old man he called Pops at Thanksgiving. After the clockmaker who had unknowingly shown him what a father was supposed to look like, I sank into the folding chair, the metal creaking beneath my weight. The contradiction was too large for any single framework to contain. How do you reconcile a man who is planning to murder your daughter with a man who named his firstborn after you? What kind of broken, impossible mechanism produces both of those outputs simultaneously? He wanted what we had. I whispered, the realization tasting like copper and salt. He was sent to destroy us, but he wanted to be us. Roz's jaw tightened. Want is irrelevant when the alternative is your child's death. Whatever Julian feels or does not feel for this family, Desmond holds the override key, and he will use it. A sharp electronic chirp from the monitoring station cut through the heavy air. Cross moved to the console, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The main screen switched to a GPS tracking interface. A red dot was moving steadily westward across a digital map of Memphis, following a route that led away from residential districts and toward the dark industrial sprawl bordering the Mississippi. He left the house with Naomi 40 minutes ago, Cross reported, her voice now carrying an edge of tactical urgency. Told her they were going to a riverside restaurant for a private grief dinner, a quiet place away from the mourners. I was on my feet before she finished the sentence. The pocket watch ticking in my hand seemed to accelerate, though I knew that was impossible. A mechanical escapement maintains constant rhythm regardless of circumstance. But my perception of time had fractured, and every tick now felt shorter than the last. "What is out there?" I demanded, stepping toward the monitor. "Where is that road going?" Roz was already pulling up satellite imagery. The red dot was heading directly toward a cluster of structures on Mud Island. Abandoned. Industrial. Isolated by water on three sides. She zoomed in, and the image resolved into the unmistakable skeletal outline of a massive building I recognized immediately. A building I had worked inside 25 years ago, back when its chandeliers still glittered and its roulette wheels still spun. "The Riverside Casino," Cross said, her hand moving toward her sidearm. "Closed in 2001. Condemned in 2008. The syndicate used it as a disposal facility throughout the 90s. Cray personally ordered at least 3 executions inside those walls. There is no restaurant where they are heading," Roz said, her voice stripped of everything but the cold mechanical truth. "He is taking our daughter into the dark, and if he gets her inside those walls, they are thick enough to swallow any sound on Earth." I stared at the red dot inching across the screen toward the dead casino and felt the last gear of denial finally slip free from my mechanism. This was not tomorrow. This was tonight. The clock was already at 0, and I was still standing in a box full of monitors while my daughter drove toward her own execution. "I need to call her." The words left my mouth before the thought was fully formed. "If I call her, you can get a precise lock on the signal. Triangulate their exact position before he gets inside those walls." Cross was already nodding, her fingers poised over the console. "We need 60 seconds of open connection. Keep him talking if he is listening. Keep her talking if she is alone. Do not say anything that alerts him to our knowledge. You are a grieving father calling his daughter after a funeral. That is all." I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen felt like it was vibrating with its own terrible energy as I stared at Naomi's contact name. The photograph attached to her number was from last Christmas. She was laughing, her head tilted back. A paper crown from a cracker sitting crooked on her dark hair. Julian was beside her in the frame, his arm around her shoulder. His smile so perfect, it could have been printed from a catalog. I pressed dial. The ringtone pulsed once, twice, 3 times. Each one sounding like a pendulum striking the inside of a hollow brass case. My throat constricted. Behind me, I could hear Cross's keyboard tapping in rapid bursts as she prepared the tracking protocol. "Breathe," Roz whispered from somewhere close. She was standing just outside my peripheral vision, a ghost refusing to fully materialize. "You are her father. Just be her father." The line clicked open. "Papa." Naomi's voice came through the speaker like a lifeline thrown across an abyss. Raw. Exhausted. The voice of a woman who had spent 3 days burying a mother who was currently standing 3 feet from the phone. "I was just thinking about you. Are you still at the house?" The word Papa hit me like a warm wave after the cold clinical dad of the earlier text message. This was my daughter. This was her real voice, not a puppet string being pulled by the man beside her. But even as relief washed through me, I heard the background sounds and my trained ear began dissecting them with involuntary precision. Water. Not the gentle lap of a restaurant fountain, but the heavy rhythmic slap of something industrial. River current against concrete pilings. And beneath that, the distant mechanical groan of old infrastructure. Settling metal. Stressed cables. The vocabulary of a structure in decay. "Where are you, sweetheart?" I forced my voice into a mold of weary parental concern. The kind a 70-year-old man naturally produces after burying his wife. "You sound tired. Julian is taking me somewhere quiet," she said. Away from everything. A restaurant by the water. He says I need to eat something. I heard his voice then. A low murmur in the background. Too soft to catch specific words, but carrying that distinctive warm baritone I had heard across 1,000 family dinners. He was close to her, close enough that anything I said would reach his ears within a heartbeat. That sounds nice, Nomi, I said, using the childhood nickname deliberately. A signal. A reminder to her, subconscious, that she had a father who was paying attention. Tell Julian to drive safe. The fog gets thick near the river this time of year. A pause. The sound of Julian's voice, slightly louder now, responding to something Naomi relayed. Then she came back. He says he has got it under control, Papa. He says everything is being taken care of tonight. The phrasing detonated in my chest. Being taken care of. Tonight. It was not a casual reassurance about dinner reservations. It was a status report delivered through my daughter's unsuspecting mouth. Julian was speaking directly to me through her, confirming his timeline, with the cold efficiency of an operative executing a schedule. I ended the call with a promise to see her in the morning. The word tomorrow, feeling like a lie so heavy it could sink through the floor. The moment the line went dead, I turned to Cross. She was staring at the monitor. The red dot had stopped moving. It had reached its destination. The GPS signal pulsed twice more on the edge of Mud Island, right at the coordinates of the condemned Riverside Casino, and then it vanished. The dot simply ceased to exist, replaced by a flashing red alert. Signal lost. The words appeared on screen, in a cold digital typeface that felt like a death certificate. He is jamming, Cross said, her hand reaching for her earpiece. Localized signal suppression. Military grade. He has killed the phone remotely. The monitor displayed nothing but a black void where my daughter's location should have been. The absence was physical, a hole punched through the digital map that corresponded exactly to the hole being punched through my chest. She is in the dark, I said, my voice barely a sound. My daughter is in the dark, and I cannot see her. Roz moved to the console, her face illuminated by the remaining active feeds. The satellite view of the casino showed one vehicle parked near a side entrance. No movement visible. No lights. The structure sat on the edge of the Mississippi like a beached leviathan, its corrugated skin reflecting nothing but the dull gray of the overcast night sky. Cross was already speaking into her earpiece, her voice shifting to tactical shorthand. She relayed coordinates, requested aerial support, mentioned response times that made my stomach drop. 15 to 20 minutes for a tactical team. An eternity measured in ticks of a clock that was already approaching zero. I cannot wait 20 minutes, I said. And then the words came that I had not planned to speak, but that emerged from some structural depth of my being with absolute certainty. I worked on that building, Cross, 25 years ago before it closed. They hired me to restore and maintain the decorative clock systems throughout the casino. The lobby timepiece, the mezzanine tower clock, the mechanical displays in the high roller suite. I spent 3 months inside those walls. I know every maintenance corridor, every service hatch, every access point that does not appear on any blueprint filed with the city. Cross stopped mid-sentence into her earpiece. She looked at me, then at Roz. A rapid tactical calculation visibly running behind her eyes. Roz stepped forward. Her face was no longer the grieving widow or the tactical agent. It was something older, more primal. The face of a mother whose child was inside a burning building. He is right, Vivian, she said. We cannot wait for the team. If Julian follows the protocol his father gave him, the window between arrival and execution is less than 30 minutes. By the time your people breach, it will be a recovery operation, not a rescue. Cross held her gaze for 3 long seconds. Then she reached beneath the console and pulled out 2 tactical vests. You follow my lead, she said, her voice carrying the weight of a decision that could end multiple careers. If I say stop, you stop. If I say run, you run. And if this goes sideways, I will deny ever meeting either of you. Understood? I took the vest. The weight of it settled onto my shoulders, like a second skeleton being strapped over the first. Heavy. Real. A physical commitment to what was about to happen. The pocket watch ticked steadily in my breast pocket now, pressed against my heart through the layers of Kevlar and cotton. Each tick felt like it was counting down something that could not be reversed once it reached its terminus. Let us go get my daughter, I said. Before the clock runs out. The drive from the storage complex to Mud Island took 11 minutes. I know because I counted every tick of the pocket watch against my chest. Each one a tiny hammer blow reminding me that time was a resource being spent whether I authorized the transaction or not. Cross-drove. A black sedan with government plates that cut through the Memphis night with the silent authority of a blade parting water. Roz sat beside me in the back seat, her hands moving in the darkness. I could hear the faint metallic clicks of her checking equipment I could not see and did not want to identify. The tactical vest pressed against my ribs with each breath, a constant physical reminder that I had crossed a threshold from which there was no quiet return. The city thinned as we approached the river. Beale Street's neon glow faded behind us, replaced by the dark industrial sprawl of the waterfront district. Shuttered warehouses, rusted cranes frozen mid-reach like the skeletal arms of giants who had died standing. The air changed too, thickening with the unmistakable smell of the Mississippi, mud and diesel, and the ancient vegetable rot of a river that had been carrying secrets south for millennia. Cross killed the headlights 2 blocks from the bridge to Mud Island. The sedan crept forward in darkness, guided only by the faint ambient glow of the cloud-covered sky reflecting off the water. Through the windshield, the condemned casino materialized from the river fog like a beached ship. Massive. Dark. Its Art Deco facade crumbling in slow motion. The once grand entrance, now a gaping mouth of shattered glass and warped steel framing. There. I pointed to the eastern perimeter, where a chain-link fence sagged against its posts like a tired sentry. Service access. The maintenance entrance I used is behind that row of ventilation housings. It connects to the mechanical chase that runs the full length of the building. Original clock wiring. Pneumatic tubing for the old bell system. It was never sealed because it is too narrow for demolition equipment. Cross parked the sedan behind a collapsed loading dock, the vehicle invisible from any angle except directly overhead. She turned in her seat, her face barely visible in the darkness. "Comms check," she said, handing me a small flesh-colored earpiece. "Channel 7. I will be coordinating from the vehicle until the tactical team arrives. You have my voice and nothing else. No backup inside those walls until my people get here." The earpiece slid into place with a cold intimacy that made my skin crawl. A tiny mechanical voice connecting me to the outside world through a thread so thin it might as well have been made of spider silk. Roz was already out of the car, moving through the darkness with a fluidity that still startled me. She paused at the trunk, and I heard the muffled sound of a bag being opened. When she turned back, her silhouette had changed. Broader at the shoulders, more angular. She had added something beneath her vest, a secondary piece of equipment she did not explain, and Cross did not acknowledge. We moved through a gap in the fence, the rusted chain link scraping against our vests with a sound like fingernails on old tin. The ground beneath us shifted from gravel to broken concrete to the soft, spongy decay of waterlogged earth. The Mississippi fog wrapped around us in layers, each step forward reducing visibility until I could barely see Roz 3 feet ahead. The smell was overwhelming now. Stagnant water. Mold. The chemical sweetness of oxidizing copper from the building's ancient plumbing. My body remembered this place before my mind did. The angle of the ground. The spacing of the ventilation housings. The particular quality of echo that bounced off the casino's eastern wall. 25 years ago, I had walked this same path every morning for 3 months, carrying a tool bag and a thermos of coffee, employed to restore the casino's elaborate system of decorative clocks. The lobby's grand timepiece with its gilded face and mechanical automata. The mezzanine tower that chimed on the quarter hour. The synchronized display in the high-roller suite that tracked time zones across 6 continents. I knew this building the way a surgeon knows the body, not from blueprints or floor plans, but from the intimate, hands-on familiarity of a man who had crawled through its mechanical veins and listened to its hidden heartbeat. Second housing from the left, I whispered, guiding Roz toward a rectangular metal structure protruding from the building's base. The access panel should be on the south face. It leads directly into the mechanical chase. The panel was there, corroded but intact. I gripped the edges and pulled. The metal groaned, a low, reluctant sound like a sleeping animal disturbed. But it gave way with a screech. I prayed the river fog would absorb before it reached any ears inside. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for a man my age, wearing a tactical vest to squeeze through. The air that exhaled from the darkness beyond was cold and mechanical, carrying the distinct smell of old grease and copper wire, and something else. Something that made every hair on the back of my neck stand at rigid attention. Oil. Fresh oil. The kind used to lubricate precision mechanical movements. Someone had been maintaining something inside these walls. Recently, watch your step, I whispered as I folded myself into the narrow chase. The walls pressed against my shoulders on both sides, corroded pipes and bundled wires brushing against my vest. I moved from memory, counting steps and turns the way I once counted gear teeth. Left at the junction, straight for 40 paces, right at the old pneumatic manifold, and then I heard it. Tick, 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 not the pocket watch against my chest. This was bigger, louder, a deep mechanical pulse that reverberated through the metal walls of the chase, like a heartbeat amplified through a stethoscope pressed against the building's own chest. It was rhythmic, precise, the unmistakable sound of a large clockwork mechanism running at full tension. I froze. Roz's hand found my shoulder in the dark, her fingers gripping, with a pressure that communicated absolute alertness. That is not the old lobby clock, I whispered, my mind racing through the mechanical inventory of the building. The lobby timepiece had been removed years before the casino closed. Its movement was in a museum in Nashville. This was something else. Something new. Something installed by someone who understood clockwork well enough to use it for a purpose I could not yet identify, but could feel approaching like a wave building offshore. And beneath the ticking, threaded through it, like a dark harmony, beneath a dominant chord, I heard my daughter crying. Muffled. Desperate. The sound of a woman who had been brave for as long as her body could sustain it, and had finally broken. The sound reached into my chest and gripped the mechanism of my heart with iron fingers. Every joint in my body locked with the overwhelming need to run toward that sound, to tear through walls and wire and whatever stood between me and my child. But 50 years of working with delicate instruments had taught me the most important lesson of my profession. Haste destroys more mechanisms than neglect ever could. I steadied my breathing. I placed my hand against the interior wall and felt the vibration of the ticking. It was coming from the main floor, the old gaming hall. And so were Naomi's tears. I continued forward, moving toward both sounds, the metronome of a machine and the crying of my daughter converging in the darkness ahead like two rivers meeting at a point I could not yet see, but knew I was approaching with every careful, measured step. The mechanical chase terminated at a ventilation grate, overlooking the main gaming floor. I pressed my face against the rusted lattice, and the scene below arranged itself before my eyes, with the terrible clarity of a nightmare that refuses to end upon waking. The gaming hall was vast, a cathedral of decay stretching 100 feet in every direction. Its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow above. Rows of dead slot machines stood like tombstones along the walls, their screens black and dusty, their chrome trim oxidized to a dull green. Overturned poker tables lay scattered across the floor, like the aftermath of a brawl frozen in time. The carpet, once burgundy, had rotted to a mottled brown that squelched with moisture from the river, seeping through the foundation. But in the exact center of this graveyard of extravagance, someone had carved a stage from the darkness. A single industrial lamp hung from a frayed cable 20 feet above, swaying almost imperceptibly in a draft that moved through the building like slow breath. Its harsh orange cone illuminated a circle perhaps 15 feet in diameter, and within that circle sat my daughter. Naomi was bound to a heavy wooden chair with nylon cord that cut into her wrists and ankles. Her surgical scrubs from the hospital shift she must have been wearing when Julian collected her were torn at the shoulder. Her face was streaked with mascara and tears. Her dark hair matted against her forehead with sweat. A cloth gag had been tied around her mouth, pulling at the corners of her lips in a way that made her look like she was trying to scream through clenched teeth. But it was her eyes that destroyed me. Wide, glassy. The eyes of someone who has moved past terror into the hollow territory beyond it, where the body simply stops processing and begins to shut down. My brilliant daughter. The woman who rebuilt hearts for a living, reduced to a broken mechanism, strapped to a chair in the dark. Julian stood behind her. His charcoal suit from the funeral was loosened at the collar, tie removed, top button undone. He held a handgun. Matte black. Government issue. By the look of it. But his grip was wrong. The barrel trembled in small erratic circles that tracked his shaking hand. A man who was certain of his purpose does not tremble. A man in conflict does. 4 figures stood at the perimeter of the light. Syndicate operatives positioned at cardinal points like the numerals on a clock face, their rifles held at low ready, barrels angled toward the floor but capable of rising to kill in less than a second. They were not watching Naomi. They were watching Julian, ensuring he followed through, ensuring the weapon fired when the trigger was pulled, regardless of what the weapon wanted. And on the wall behind them, mounted with industrial bolts to the exposed brick, hung the source of the ticking. It was a clock. But not any clock I had ever seen in 50 years of the craft. It was enormous. 4 feet in diameter. Custom built from what appeared to be industrial brass gears and hand-forged iron framing, its face marked not with hours but with a single descending numerical sequence. A countdown mechanism, open-faced so every gear and lever was visible, like the skeleton of a creature designed specifically to measure the remaining moments of a human life. The display read 8 minutes and 47 seconds. And it was descending. I felt Roz go rigid beside me in the narrow chase. Her hand found my forearm in the dark and squeezed with a pressure that communicated a single wordless command. Wait. Not yet. I understood the implication immediately. That clock was not decorative. It was functional, connected to something. When it reached 0, something would happen that could not be undone. A detonation. A mechanism, something Julian had wired into the bones of this building that would execute the plan regardless of whether his hand pulled the trigger. Cross. I breathed into the earpiece. Are you seeing a thermal signature on the building's lower level? Basement or subfloor? Static crackled. Then her voice, tight and low. Affirmative. Heat source beneath the main floor. Consistent with an incendiary device. If that clock reaches 0 and no override is entered, that basement is going to turn into a furnace. The floor above it will collapse within 90 seconds. Julian had built a fail-safe. Even if he lost his nerve, even if some flicker of humanity stayed his hand from the trigger, the clock would finish what he could not. The building itself would become the weapon, consuming everything inside it when the countdown expired. I watched him pace behind Naomi's chair, his free hand running through his hair in a gesture I recognized from a decade of family dinners. It was the same motion he made when he was anxious about a work presentation or stressed about a quarterly report. Except now that familiar gesture was happening 3 feet from my daughter, while a countdown clock devoured their remaining minutes together. Then the laptop on the overturned poker table beside him flickered to life. The screen's cold blue glow cut through the orange warmth of the industrial lamp like a blade of ice. The image stabilized, revealing a face I had only seen in a 28-year-old mugshot until this moment. But Desmond Cray had aged. His shaved head was now a crown of thin gray stubble. His skin had taken on the yellowish pallor of a man denied sunlight for a quarter-century. But those eyes, those flat, reptilian eyes, had not aged a single day. They held the same patient, calculating hunger that had stared out of that booking photograph across 3 decades of incarceration. He wore an orange jumpsuit. Behind him, I could make out the institutional beige of a cell wall. He was broadcasting from inside the federal penitentiary, using what had to be a smuggled device, and the connection was clean. Someone on the inside was facilitating this call. Desmond did not look at Naomi. He did not look at the guards or the clock. He looked only at Julian, with the intimate, possessive gaze of a father assessing the performance of his creation. "The clock is ticking, son." Desmond's voice filled the ruined casino like smoke. Low, gravelly, distorted by the digital compression, but carrying a weight that seemed to press the air flat. "I did not raise you to hesitate. I did not spend 25 years sculpting you from nothing so you could stand there shaking like a child afraid of the dark." Julian's face went gray. The trembling in his gun hand intensified, the barrel now tracing wild arcs that swept dangerously across Naomi's head, and then away again. The operatives shifted. Their trigger fingers moved from guard position to active, ready to execute their own orders if Julian failed. I watched the countdown descend below 5 minutes, and felt the full crushing weight of the trap reveal itself. Julian was not just expected to kill my daughter. He was expected to do it on camera. A performance for a father who would accept nothing less than total obedience as proof that his 25-year investment had not been wasted. "Finish what I started, boy." Desmond leaned closer to the camera, his pixelated face filling the laptop screen. "Or your real boy stops breathing tonight. You know I have men at that house in Nashville. You know what they will do to young Theodore if you disappoint me." The name struck Julian like a physical blow. His knees buckled slightly, and for a single frozen instant, the muzzle of the gun dropped toward the floor. 5 minutes. The clock ticked louder, and I realized we were all trapped inside the same mechanism, each gear interlocked with the next, each movement dependent on forces none of us fully controlled. Roz moved before I could stop her. One moment, she was beside me in the narrow mechanical chase, her breath, a controlled whisper against my shoulder. The next, she was gone, sliding through the maintenance access panel at the far end of the grate, with the fluid precision of a woman who had spent decades entering rooms where she was not expected, and where her presence was the most dangerous thing in the space. I watched through the grate as her silhouette emerged from the shadows at the edge of the gaming floor. She crossed 20 feet of rotting carpet without making a sound, positioning herself just beyond the perimeter of the light cone, a ghost waiting at the threshold of the living world. Then she stepped into the light. The effect was immediate and devastating. The orange glow caught her face, her body, the sharp tactical lines of her clothing, and presented them to the room like a resurrection rendered in flesh and shadow. She stood with her spine straight and her chin lifted, making no attempt to hide, no weapon drawn, no defensive posture, just the terrible, absolute presence of a dead woman refusing to stay buried. Julian saw her first. His entire body seized, a mechanism jamming mid-cycle. The gun in his hand froze at the apex of its trembling arc. The barrel pointed at nothing and everything. His face drained of color so rapidly it looked like someone had pulled a plug at the base of his skull, allowing every drop of blood to evacuate his features. His lips parted but no sound emerged, just the strangled breath of a man whose operating system had encountered an input it was never programmed to process. "You," he whispered. The word sounded like it had been dragged out of him by a hook. I saw the death certificate. I checked the hospital database myself. I watched them seal the casket. "You saw what a professional wanted you to see." Roz's voice was steady, cold, stripped of every trace of the warm bookshop owner who hummed hymns while shelving novels. This was the voice of the woman who had dismantled a billion-dollar criminal network before this man had learned to shave. "You saw what 28 years of experience designed for you to see, and you believed it because deep down, you wanted it to be true. You wanted me gone because as long as I was alive, You knew you could never finish this. Behind the gag, Naomi made a sound. Not a word. Something more primal. A keening, choking sob that tore through the fabric pressed against her mouth. Her eyes, which had been glazed with dissociation moments before, were now blown wide with a shock so complete. It looked like her pupils might swallow her irises entirely. She was staring at her mother with an expression that contained every emotion a human face can produce simultaneously. Joy, horror, confusion, betrayal, relief. Each one fighting for dominance, and none of them winning. Her body bucked against the restraints, the wooden chair legs scraping against the concrete floor with a screeching sound that echoed through the vaulted space. Julian ripped the gag down with his free hand. Whether from instinct or tactical calculation, I could not tell. Mom. Naomi's voice cracked open like a bone breaking underwater. Barely audible, but carrying a weight that seemed to distort the air around it. You are dead. I buried you. I threw dirt on your coffin with my own hands. How? How is this? Roz did not move toward her daughter. She held her position like an anchor, her eyes locked not on Naomi but on Julian. On the gun, on the countdown clock behind them that had just passed the 3-minute mark, the 4 syndicate operatives were in visible disarray. Their rifles, which had been trained on Julian's potential trajectory of failure, now wavered between multiple targets. The woman who had materialized from nowhere was not in their briefing. She was not in any scenario their controller had prepared them for. One of them spoke into a concealed mic. His voice, a rapid, harsh whisper. I could not decipher. They were requesting guidance from a command structure that was currently visible on the laptop screen. And Desmond Cray was screaming. His face filled the laptop display, the pixelated orange of his jumpsuit blurring at the edges as he pressed closer to whatever smuggled camera he was using. His composure, that reptilian patience, had evaporated. What remained was raw, unfiltered rage, the tantrum of a man who had spent 25 years building a clockwork masterpiece, only to watch an uninvited hand reach into the mechanism. Kill her! His voice was a distorted roar that bounced off the corrugated walls and merged with the ticking of the countdown clock until they formed a single monstrous rhythm. She is right there, Julian, the woman who took everything from us. Kill her now. Put the bullet in her chest and finish what I spent your entire life building you to do. Julian's arm raised, the gun barrel tracking toward Roz. But his elbow locked at a wrong angle. His wrist refused to stabilize. The mechanism of violence was jammed by something deeper than training, deeper than fear. I watched the muscles in his jaw work as he ground his teeth together, and I saw the boy from the photograph. 7 years old, sitting in rubble, watching his father disappear in chains, learning to store hatred the way other children store love. I remember you, Roz said, and her voice dropped to something almost gentle, almost maternal. A tone I recognized from 1,000 bedtime stories read to Naomi in the dark. You were 7 years old, sitting on that metal chair in the processing room without a tear on your face. I signed the foster paperwork because I thought I was giving you a chance. I thought I was saving a child. I was wrong, but not in the way you think. Julian's eyes were streaming now. Twin rivers cutting through the mask that had held for a decade. His voice came out broken. Fragmented, like words being pushed through a mechanism that was seizing with every syllable. You took him from me, he rasped. You took my father and you gave me nothing. You sent me into a system that chewed me up and spat me into the hands of the only person who still wanted me. What did you think would happen? The clock passed 2 minutes 30 seconds. The ticking seemed to accelerate, each beat landing harder, louder, more insistent. Desmond's face on the screen was contorted beyond recognition, his screaming reaching a pitch that made the laptop speakers distort into crackling static. 60 seconds, Julian. Desmond's voice cut through everything like a siren. 60 seconds. Kill them both or Young. Theodore dies on his front porch tonight. I have 3 men at that house right now. 3 men with photographs of your boy's face in their pockets. Do you hear me? 60 seconds. Julian's gun arm swung wildly between Roz and Naomi, his body caught between two impossible gravitational forces. His son in Nashville, his wife in the chair, the father on the screen. The woman who started it all standing before him like judgment made flesh. I gripped the edge of the grate, my fingers white with pressure. The clock read 2 minutes 15 seconds and descending. My daughter was crying in great heaving sobs that shook the wooden chair. Roz stood motionless in the cone of light, her eyes never leaving Julian's face. And Desmond Cray counted down from his prison cell, each number a hammer blow, driving his son toward the irreversible. I could not wait any longer. I pushed through the maintenance panel, lowered myself from the chase to the floor of the gaming hall, and stepped out from the shadows, into the light, between the gun and my daughter. "Look at me, son," I said. "Not the screen. Look at me." The gun barrel found me instantly, a black eye staring at the center of my chest from 8 feet away. Julian's hand was shaking so badly the muzzle traced figure eights in the air between us, but at this distance even a wild shot would find its home in my body. I was aware of every physiological signal my system was producing. The metallic flood of adrenaline on my tongue, the hammering of my pulse against the tactical vest, the cold sweat crawling down my spine like a slow insect. But I was also aware of something else. Something my eyes found on Julian's left wrist as the orange lamplight caught it. A watch. Not modern. Not digital. An antique timepiece with a hand-engraved gold case and a crystal face that caught the flickering light with a familiar warmth. I knew that watch. I knew it the way a parent knows their own child's face in a crowd of strangers. Patek Philippe. 1882. Open-face hunter case with a floral engraving and a hand-wound movement I had rebuilt from 17 individual components over the course of 3 weeks. I had replaced the mainspring, reseated the balance wheel, and polished every gear until the mechanism ran with a precision that bordered on musical. 30 years ago, in my shop on South Main Street, for a client who paid in cash and whose name I never thought to question, I fixed that watch, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. The words were not planned. They rose from the same structural depth that had driven me into the light. My eyes locked onto the timepiece on his wrist, and Julian followed my gaze downward. "Your father brought it to me 30 years ago. Before I knew his name. Before I knew what he was. I spent 3 weeks rebuilding that movement by hand. Every gear. Every spring. Every jewel bearing." Julian's breath hitched. The gun wavered. Behind me, I could hear Naomi's ragged sobbing and the relentless tick of the countdown clock measuring what remained of all our lives. Desmond's voice was still screaming from the laptop, a distorted digital rage that filled the space like poison gas. But Julian was no longer looking at the screen. He was looking at the watch on his own wrist, with the expression of a man seeing a familiar object for the first time. I reached into the breast pocket of my tactical vest, my movements deliberately slow, and withdrew the silver pocket watch Clement had given me at the cemetery. It was ticking. Steady. Calm. A mechanical heartbeat that seemed to exist outside the chaos around us. I held it up, the silver case catching the light, and opened the cover with my thumb. Inside the case lid, engraved in small, precise letters that I had never seen until this moment but that Roz must have commissioned years ago, were 7 words. "Time heals what revenge never can." I turned the open watch toward Julian so he could read the inscription. His eyes moved across the words, and I watched something fracture behind them. Not the mask of the operative. Something deeper. The architecture of the lie he had been living inside since he was 7 years old. The hands that fixed that watch on your wrist are the same hands that held your wife when she was born, I said, stepping closer. 1 step, then another, until I could feel the heat of the gun barrel near my collarbone. The same hands that taught you how to change a carburetor in my garage. The same hands that held your shoulders when you told me Naomi was pregnant and you were terrified of being a father. Julian's face was a ruin. Tears streaming. jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding over the sound of the ticking clock. The gun barrel dipped an inch. Then two. "You named your son Theodore," I said, and my voice broke on the name. My name. You named him after the old clockmaker you were supposed to hate. After the man whose family you were sent to destroy. Why would you do that if this was just a mission, Julian? Why would you brand your own child with the name of your enemy unless some part of you already knew the truth? The clock on the wall read 1 minute 7 seconds. Desmond was shrieking, his voice cracking with fury and desperation. Do it now. Do it now, or I swear on everything I built, that boy dies tonight. I will burn that house to the ground with him inside it. Do you hear me, Julian? 50 seconds. I took one final step. Close enough now to place my hand over the barrel of the gun. Close enough to feel the tremor in his grip, transmitted through the cold metal into my palm. I did not push the gun away. I did not try to disarm him. I simply held it, absorbing his violence into my steady, watchmaker's hands. Your boy is 8 years old, I whispered. The same age you were when they took your father. If you pull this trigger, you are writing his future in the same ink Desmond used to write yours. You are building another clock wound by hatred, aimed at another innocent family, ticking toward another night exactly like this one 30 years from now. Is that what you want for Theodore? Another warehouse, another gun, another child's life turned into a weapon. Julian's mouth opened. A sound emerged that was not a word but a noise I recognized from my workshop. The sound a mainspring makes when it finally releases its stored tension in a single violent unwinding. A sob so deep it seemed to originate from the floor itself. I cannot. He choked. I cannot let him be what I am. Choose which clock you want to live by, I said, pressing the open pocket watch against his chest. The one on that wall counting down to destruction. Or this one, the one that counts forward, toward your son's future, toward something that was never built by hate. The clock read 31 seconds. Julian's arm moved. Fast. Violent. A convulsion of decision that happened in the space between heartbeats. The gun swung away from my chest, away from Naomi, away from Roz, and leveled directly at the laptop screen where Desmond Cray's distorted face was contorted in a final scream of command. The gunshot was thunder in the enclosed space. The laptop exploded in a shower of sparks and liquid crystal. Desmond's voice severed mid-syllable into a ringing silence that felt like the entire building had taken a breath and held it. Fragments of screen scattered across the poker table like shattered ice, and the blue glow of the connection died instantly, plunging that corner of the room into sudden, absolute darkness. Julian dropped the gun. It clattered against the concrete, with a sound that echoed 3 times before the walls swallowed it. He turned toward Naomi, his body moving with the desperate, uncoordinated urgency of a man acting on instinct rather than training. He threw himself over her, covering her bound body with his own, shielding her from the 4 operatives whose rifles were already rising. But the clock was still ticking. I looked at the wall. The countdown read 12 seconds. 12 seconds and falling. The basement! Julian screamed, his voice muffled against Naomi's shoulder. There is a real device in the basement. Ammonium nitrate. Enough to take the floor out. I know the override code. I installed it. But I need the keypad. East wall, behind the cashier cage. 12 seconds. And the keypad was 40 feet away in the dark. 12 seconds. 40 feet. 4 rifles. The mathematics of the impossible hung in the air like a held breath. Then Roz moved. She did not hesitate. She did not announce herself or ask permission. From beneath her tactical vest, she produced a compact device no larger than a paperback novel. Matte black, with a single recessed button on its surface. I had seen her slip it into her gear back at the sedan. The secondary insurance policy Cross had never authorized. She raised it above her head and pressed the button with the flat of her thumb. The effect was instantaneous and total. A pulse I could not hear but felt in my teeth, a pressure wave that rolled through the air like a silent detonation. Every light source in the casino died simultaneously. The industrial lamp overhead, the faint emergency exit signs, the glow of the dead laptop fragments. Even the countdown clock on the wall flickered violently, its mechanism stuttering as the electromagnetic pulse swept through its circuitry. But the clock did not stop. Its movement was mechanical, not electronic. Gears and springs and physical escapement, immune to the pulse that had blinded everything else. In the absolute darkness that swallowed the gaming floor, I could still hear it ticking. 10, 9, 8. The operatives fired blind. Muzzle flashes erupted in the darkness, like orange stars being born and dying in the same instant. The sound was catastrophic in the enclosed space, a percussive violence that hit my eardrums like fists. I threw myself flat against the concrete floor, covering my head, the tactical vest absorbing the impact against my ribs. Bullets struck metal and masonry in every direction, sparking off the dead slot machines and punching through the rotted drywall with sounds like bones breaking. Julian was already running. I could not see him in the pitch black, but I could hear him. The rapid slap of his shoes against concrete, moving with a certainty that told me he knew this building too. He had mapped it. He had installed the device. He knew exactly where the keypad was. And he was covering 40 feet in the dark, while bullets cut the air around him. 6, 5, 4. I heard the sharp electronic beep of a keypad accepting a code. One tone, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6 digits entered in a sequence so rapid the sounds nearly merged into a single sustained note. 3 seconds. My body tensed for the detonation, every muscle locked against the concrete floor, bracing for the upward force of an explosion that would turn the ground beneath me into a collapsing cavity of fire and debris. I thought of Naomi strapped to that chair directly above the basement. I thought of the floor giving way beneath her. I thought of the sound she would make. Then silence. Not the silence of death. The silence of a mechanism arrested mid-stroke. The ticking stopped. The countdown, which had filled the building with its relentless heartbeat for nearly 9 minutes, simply ceased. The sudden absence of sound was so profound it felt like being submerged in deep water. My ears rang with the ghost of it, phantom ticks echoing in the neural pathways that had been tracking the rhythm. 3 seconds. The display had frozen at 3 seconds remaining. I would not know this until later, when the emergency lights revealed the stopped face of that monstrous clock. But in the darkness, the silence told me enough. Julian had reached the keypad. Julian had entered the code. Julian had stopped the mechanism with 3 ticks left to spare. The darkness lasted 4 more seconds before the world exploded again, but this time with salvation rather than destruction. The main entry doors of the casino blew inward, with a series of shaped charges that sent shockwaves rippling through the stagnant air. Flashbang grenades followed immediately, detonating in a blinding sequence of white phosphorescent light that turned the darkness into a strobe-lit hellscape. I squeezed my eyes shut against the assault, but even through my eyelids, the flashes were searing. FBI. Drop your weapons. Down on the ground now. Now. Tactical voices, multiple, overlapping. The controlled aggression of a breach team executing a well-rehearsed protocol. Boots hammered across the concrete floor in rapid, coordinated patterns. Laser sights cut through the residual smoke and dust like red surgical lines, finding the syndicate operatives one by one. Cross! I realized through the ringing in my ears. She had timed the breach. She had been listening through my earpiece, tracking the countdown, coordinating her team's arrival for the exact moment the electromagnetic pulse created the window. The FBI had been seconds away the entire time, staged outside, waiting for the precise tactical opening. One of the operatives did not surrender. In the chaos of the flashbangs and the breach, he recovered faster than the others. I heard the sharp crack of a rifle firing from close range, followed immediately by the heavy impact sound of a body being struck. Julian, He had been running back from the keypad toward Naomi's chair when the round caught him in the left shoulder. The force spun him sideways, but his momentum carried him forward, and he fell across Naomi's bound form, his body draping over hers like a shield made of flesh and bone, and whatever remained of his fractured soul. The responding shot from the tactical team was instantaneous. A single controlled round that hit the operative's shooting arm and sent his rifle clattering across the concrete into the dark. Clear. All hostiles down. Secure the primary. Secure the asset. Emergency lights flickered to life along the baseboards, casting a dim amber glow across the devastation. The gaming floor looked like a war zone. Spent casings littered the concrete. Smoke hung in layered sheets beneath the vaulted ceiling. 3 operatives were face down with tactical officers kneeling on their backs. The 4th was clutching his shattered arm and screaming. And in the center of it all, in that circle where the industrial lamp had swayed minutes ago, Julian Voss lay slumped across my daughter. Blood soaked through his shirt at the shoulder, spreading in a dark bloom against the fabric. His face was pressed against Naomi's arm, his eyes open and focused on her with an intensity that burned through the chaos. "It was never," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the shouts and radio chatter filling the space. "It was never just a mission, Naomi. I need you to know that. Whatever else was a lie, that part was real." Cross appeared at my side, combat knife drawn. 2 swift strokes severed the nylon cord binding Naomi's wrists and ankles. My daughter slumped forward, freed but not free. Her body trembled with a violence that looked almost seizure-like. Julian's bloody hand reached toward her face. But Naomi did not reach back. She did not look at him. She did not look at Roz, who stood 5 feet away with tears cutting silent tracks through the grime on her face. She did not look at me. She looked at nothing. Her eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance that did not exist, retreating behind a wall of dissociation so thick that our voices could not breach it. When the paramedics arrived moments later and lifted Julian onto a stretcher, his hand finally falling away from her, Naomi whispered a single sentence that made every mechanism in my chest grind to a halt. "Do not touch me. Everything is gears. Everything is gears. And none of them are real." Cross spoke into her earpiece, her voice steady despite the carnage. "Nashville team confirms. The boy is secure. Caleb is safe." I heard the words. I processed their meaning. Julian's son would live. The leverage was broken. The syndicate's final hold was neutralized. But standing there watching my daughter refuse to recognize the world around her, I realized that survival was not the same thing as rescue. We had stopped the clock. We had saved her life, but something behind her eyes had stopped ticking too. And I did not know if I had the tools to restart it. The fluorescent lights of Baptist Memorial Hospital were the cruelest illumination I had ever endured. They exposed everything without mercy. The dried mud on my shoes from the riverbank, the tactical vest marks still pressed into my shirt, the deep lines of exhaustion carved into Roz's face as she sat beside me on a plastic chair that seemed designed to make comfort impossible. We had been in this waiting room for 3 hours. The clock on the wall, a cheap institutional thing with a plastic face and a second hand that stuttered between each tick, had become my personal torturer. After a night defined by a countdown measured in seconds, the slow passage of ordinary time felt like a different kind of violence. Naomi was behind a set of double doors. I was not permitted to pass. The trauma team had taken her immediately upon arrival, whisking her stretcher down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and industrial floor cleaner. A physician with tired eyes and steady hands had emerged once, approximately 90 minutes in, to deliver a clinical summary that landed like a series of small, precise blows. Acute dissociative episode with catatonic features. Severe dehydration. Ligature injuries to both wrists and ankles, consistent with prolonged restraint. Early-stage hypothermia from extended exposure to the river damp. Physically, she will recover fully. Psychologically, she has constructed a barrier. A complete withdrawal from external stimuli as a protective mechanism against processing the trauma. At present, anyone connected to the events of this evening, particularly family members, represents a threat to that barrier. She needs space, time, and specialized intervention. Space. The word was a door being closed in my face. My daughter was 50 feet away, and the distance between us had never been greater. Roz had tried once. About an hour after we arrived, she had stood and walked toward the double doors with the measured determination of a woman who had breached federal compounds and stared down criminal networks. But she was not facing a network now. She was facing her own child's terror. A nurse intercepted her at the threshold and spoke in low tones that I could not hear from my seat. Whatever was said, Roz returned looking hollowed, as if someone had reached inside her and removed a structural component without which the rest could not stand. She flinched. Roz whispered, settling back into the chair beside me. Her hands lay in her lap, palms up, empty. The nurse said when Naomi heard my voice in the corridor, her vitals spiked. Heart rate, blood pressure, cortisol. My daughter's body now registers my existence as a threat response. I reached over and took her hand. It was cold despite the overheated hospital air. The woman who had orchestrated a federal operation from a storage unit, who had staged her own death with chessmaster precision, who had walked into a warehouse full of armed men without a visible tremor, was sitting beside me with tears running silently down her face. Not the tears of an agent. The tears of a mother whose child cannot bear the sound of her voice. You saved her life, Roz, I said. The words felt inadequate, like offering a bandage for an amputation. She did not respond immediately. The institutional clock ticked. Somewhere down the corridor, a machine beeped in a rhythm that sounded like a mechanical heart struggling to maintain its cadence. I saved her body, she finally said. I do not know if I saved anything else. We sat with that truth between us. It was too large for the small plastic chairs and the fluorescent lights and the thin hospital air. It filled the space like a gas, invisible but oppressive, making every breath feel earned rather than given. Cross appeared from a side corridor, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand rubbing the back of her neck in a gesture of exhaustion I had not seen from her before. She ended her call and walked toward us with the measured pace of someone carrying information that has weight. Updates, she said, pulling a chair from the wall and sitting across from us without ceremony. 39 syndicate members arrested across 4 states in the last 3 hours. Coordinated federal sweeps using intelligence Julian provided during his initial debriefing at the scene. He gave us everything: names, locations, account numbers, operational protocols. The organization is functionally dismantled as of 40 minutes ago. She paused. Her eyes moved between Roz and me, with a flicker of something almost human beneath the professional exterior. And Desmond Cray is dead. The words landed in the quiet of the waiting room like a stone dropped into still water. I waited for the ripples to reach me, expecting to feel something. Triumph, relief, vindication. Something proportional to the magnitude of a threat that had hung over my family for 28 years finally being extinguished. But all I felt was tired. How? Roz asked. Her voice was flat, professional, as if she were asking about a case file, rather than the man who had orchestrated the attempted murder of her daughter. Cardiac arrest, Cross said, approximately 11 minutes after the feed from the casino was severed. The prison medical team attempted resuscitation, but he was pronounced dead within the hour. The working theory is that the stress of losing control, of watching his entire operation collapse in real time through that screen, triggered a massive myocardial event, a heart attack. I murmured. The irony was almost too perfect to be coincidental. The man who had tried to stop my daughter's heart was killed by the failure of his own. 25 years of hatred, I said, staring at the clock on the wall. And in the end, time just took him. No trial, no dramatic confrontation, just a muscle that finally gave out under the weight of its own poison. Roz squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. We sat in the ugly fluorescent light of a hospital waiting room. Two people who had survived a war hidden inside a marriage, and let the silence hold us. It was not comfortable. It was not healing, but it was honest. And after a night built entirely on deception and manufactured deaths and mechanical traps, honesty was the only foundation I trusted enough to rest my weight upon. "Do not ever die on me again," I said, my eyes still fixed on the clock. "Not for any mission. Not for any ghost. Not for any reason that requires my heart to break as evidence." She leaned her head against my shoulder. The weight of it was warm and real. And present. "Deal," she whispered. No more stopped clocks. The clock on the wall ticked forward, second by second, measuring not a countdown, but a beginning. Slow, uncertain, but moving in the only direction that matters. Healing is not a clock that runs forward at a steady rate. It is a mechanism that starts and stops, advances and retreats, sometimes running backward for days, before lurching forward a single reluctant tick. I learned this in the 30 days that followed the loudest night of my life. The Riverside Recovery Center sat on a quiet street in Germantown, a tree-lined neighborhood, where the loudest sound was the wind through the oak canopy and the occasional distant bark of a neighbor's dog. The building itself was a converted Victorian home, painted sage green, with a wraparound porch and tall windows that let the autumn light pour in without restriction. It was designed to feel unlike a hospital, and it succeeded in every way except the one that mattered. My daughter was inside and I was outside, separated by walls that had nothing to do with brick and everything to do with what the mind builds when it can no longer tolerate reality. The first week, she would not see me. I drove to Germantown every day, parked beneath the same oak tree, and sat in my truck for an hour. Before driving home, I was not waiting for permission. I was simply being present. A clockmaker understands the value of proximity without pressure. You do not force a seized movement. You apply warmth. You apply patience. You wait for the metal to expand enough to release on its own. The second week, her therapist called. Brief. Measured. Professional. Naomi had asked if I was still coming. I confirmed that I was. The therapist said she had nodded when told this and returned to her silence. That nod was the first gear engaging after weeks of frozen immobility. I held onto it like a man gripping a ledge. The third week, they let me into the garden. Naomi sat on a wooden bench beneath a maple tree whose leaves were turning the color of old copper. She looked thinner. Her eyes carried a quality I recognized from damaged watch crystals, present but fractured, letting light through in distorted patterns rather than clean lines. She did not stand when I approached. She did not smile, but she did not flinch either. And in the mathematics of trauma recovery, the absence of retreat counted as an advance. "You look better, Nomi," I said, settling onto the bench beside her with enough distance between us to communicate respect for her boundaries. "The color is coming back." "Color is just light hitting a surface, Papa," she replied without looking up. "It does not mean anything is happening underneath." Her voice was hollow but present, a mechanism running at low power rather than fully stopped. We sat together for 20 minutes. I did not push. I did not mention the casino, or Julian, or her mother. I talked about the weather, about the neighbor's cat that had taken to sleeping on our porch, about a documentary on Swiss watchmaking I had watched the previous evening. Small, safe gears. Tiny movements that asked nothing of her except to exist in the same space as another human being. I brought Roz's letters every visit. Small envelopes sealed with wax, written in the elegant sloping hand that Naomi had grown up watching address, birthday cards, and grocery lists. Each one contained only a few lines. No apologies, no explanations, no tactical language, just fragments of shared memory. The time Naomi fell from the gymnastics beam and Roz held ice against her swelling ankle for an hour. The recipe for the lemon cake they baked together every March. The name of the stray cat they rescued. When Naomi was 9, the first 3 envelopes remained unopened on her nightstand. I watched them accumulate during my visits like sediment building at the bottom of a still pond. But during the 4th week, something shifted. I arrived on a Tuesday to find all 3 envelopes opened, their contents spread across her lap. "Does she still have that pocket watch?" Naomi asked without preamble, her eyes still fixed on a letter in her hand. I paused. The question was unexpected. Of all the objects connected to that night, the pocket watch was the one Naomi should have had the least connection to. She had not seen it in the casino. She had been blindfolded with trauma when its ticking played its part in the rescue. But somehow, through the letters or through some current of family knowledge that runs deeper than words, she had learned of its existence. "She does," I said carefully. "It is back in its case, still ticking." Naomi was quiet for a long moment. A leaf detached from the maple above us and spiraled down in a slow copper arc, landing on the bench between us like a punctuation mark. "I want to see her," she said. The words came out like something extracted rather than offered. But only if she comes as the agent, not the mother, not the bookshop woman who pretended to lose her reading glasses every Tuesday. I want the woman who actually exists. I want truth. All of it. No more covers. No more legends. Just the machinery. I nodded, my throat tight. "I will tell her." That evening, I sat on the back porch of our house on Carr Avenue. The magnolia tree was bare now, its branches sketching dark lines against the fading sky. Roz emerged from the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea, the porcelain warm against my palms as she placed one in my hands. She sat beside me on the old wooden swing, and for a long time we simply rocked in the rhythm of the chains, a pendulum motion that felt like the most honest thing our marriage had produced in decades. "She wants to see you," I said. Roz's hands tightened around her mug. Her breath caught, a tiny hitch that she could not suppress despite 30 years of training. "As the agent, as the truth," I replied. "She wants to know the real woman, not the cover." Roz leaned her head back against the swing's wooden frame and closed her eyes. A tear escaped the corner of her left eye and tracked down her temple into her hair. It was the most vulnerable I had seen her since the night she first told me about the service. "Can she forgive what the real woman did?" she whispered. "I do not know," I answered honestly. "But she cannot forgive what does not exist. The fiction is what broke her. The truth is the only thing that might put her back together." We rocked in silence. The chains creaked. The bare magnolia shivered in the wind. Somewhere inside the house, a clock I had built 20 years ago chimed the hour with a clarity that carried across the porch and into the darkening yard. At my next visit, Naomi was waiting on the bench again. Stronger. Straighter. Her eyes still carried fractures, but they focused now with a precision that reminded me of the surgeon she had been before the world tore the scalpel from her hands. "Did Julian write?" she asked. "From the prison." I hesitated, then nodded. 2 weeks ago. I was not sure you wanted to know." She looked at me with an expression I could not entirely decode. Part curiosity, part steel, part something fragile being tested against its own weight. "Bring it next time," she said. "I need to decide what to do with his words before they decide what to do with me." The envelope from the federal detention facility in Marion, Illinois, arrived on a Wednesday. It sat on my kitchen table for 2 days before I brought it to Germantown, its weight disproportionate to the single sheet of paper I knew it contained. Certified mail. Return address stamped with institutional precision. The paper thick enough that I could not see the handwriting through the envelope, though I knew it was there, pressed into the fiber by a man with too much time and too few walls left to hide behind. Roz and I debated whether to deliver it at all. We sat at that same kitchen table where she had first told me about the service 28 years ago, and we argued with the quiet intensity of two people who had learned that secrets were more dangerous than the truths they concealed. If we keep this from her, we are building another hidden mechanism, I said, turning the envelope between my fingers. Another secret room. Another locked door she will eventually find and resent us for. Roz stared at the envelope as if it might detonate. He does not deserve her attention. It is not about what he deserves, I replied. It is about what she needs. She asked for it. She has the right to decide whether his words still have power over her. Roz closed her eyes, nodded once, and I drove to Germantown with a dead man's son's confession riding in my breast pocket beside the ticking watch. Naomi was in the garden, stronger now. 6 weeks post-casino, and the fractures in her eyes had begun to fill with something that resembled, if not yet peace, then at least the structural prerequisites for it. She was wearing her own clothes instead of the center's soft linens. A cream-colored sweater, dark jeans. Her hair pulled back in the efficient ponytail she wore during surgical rotations. She looked like a woman preparing to re-enter a world she was not yet sure she recognized. I handed her the envelope without commentary. She took it with steady hands, examined the return address with the clinical detachment of a physician reading a lab result, and opened it with a single clean tear along the seal. She read in silence. I watched her face the way I watch a movement under magnification, tracking the micro-expressions that flickered across her features like shadows cast by a candle in an unstable draft. Her jaw tightened, released, tightened again. Her nostrils flared once. Her eyes moved back and forth across the cramped handwriting with increasing speed, as if the words were accelerating. I did not read the letter, but Naomi read portions aloud, her voice flat and controlled, as if she were narrating a case study rather than her own demolished marriage. He says he was 8 years old when his world ended, she reported, her eyes fixed on the page. He says he spent 20 years being built into something he did not choose. He says the mission was supposed to be simple. Get close. Gain trust. Wait for the signal. She turned the page over. He says somewhere in the 3rd year of our marriage, something broke in his programming. He says he started loving the assignment more than the mission. He says he wanted to run, but his father had Caleb. He says every time he called you Pops at Thanksgiving, it was the closest thing to prayer he knew. She paused. When she spoke again, her voice carried a vibration I had not heard before. Not anger, not grief, something more precise. The sound of a final accounting being rendered. He named his son Theodore. She said, looking up at me. He says it was because you were the only father he ever wanted. He says the boy in Nashville was his attempt to build the family he was trying to destroy for us. He says he knows that does not make it better. He says he does not ask for forgiveness. She set the letter on the bench beside her. The autumn wind ruffled its edges, threatening to carry it away, but she placed her palm flat upon it, with a pressure that was not protective, but suppressive, holding it down, keeping it contained. He says the 3 weeks before the casino were the worst of his life. She continued, her voice hardening, because he had already decided to refuse the kill order. He was going to run with Naomi, take Caleb, disappear. But then Mom died, and he thought his last potential ally had been eliminated. So he defaulted back to the program. She looked at me. Her eyes were dry, clear, holding a weight that would have crushed most people, but that she was managing with the precision of a surgeon handling a loaded instrument. He would have saved me, she said, if he had known she was alive. That is what he is saying. Yes, I replied. That is what he is saying. Naomi was quiet for a long time. The maple above us scattered copper leaves across the grass in a slow, continuous descent. Finally, she picked up the letter, folded it once with deliberate precision, and reached into the pocket of her jeans. She produced a disposable lighter, cheap blue plastic, the kind sold at gas stations for $1. She held the letter by one corner and sparked the flame. The paper caught immediately. The fire climbed the page in a rapid orange line, consuming Julian's cramped handwriting word by word, sentence by sentence. His confessions, his explanations, his almost apologies, all of it curling into black and gray and disintegrating into fragments that the wind caught and carried upward like a flock of dark birds taking flight. "I do not need his confessions," Naomi said, watching the fire eat the last corner of the page. Her voice carried a weight that sounded like a door being closed and locked for the final time. "I do not need his explanations or his regrets. I need his absence. I need the space where he used to be, to stay empty long enough for something real to grow there." The last fragment of paper turned to ash on her fingertips. She brushed them against her jeans, leaving a faint gray streak that she examined with a look of clinical satisfaction. "I want to be a Blackwell again, Papa," she said, and for the first time since the casino, her voice carried the resonance I remembered, the full, grounded tone of a woman who knows exactly where her feet are planted. Not a Blackwell who is under surveillance, not a Blackwell attached to a secret. One that is real, one that knows what time it really is. I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. It was the sensation of a gear engaging, a movement, restarting. The first true tick of a mechanism that had been silent for 6 weeks finally finding its rhythm again. She turned to me, and the spark in her eyes caught the pale morning light with a quality I had not seen since before Julian ever spoke her name. "Now tell me the real story of how you and Mom met," she said. "No covers, no legends, no safe house briefings. I want the truth, all of it. From the beginning." I took a deep breath. The air tasted of ash and autumn and the clean, sharp promise of something starting over. And I began to tell my daughter the story of her parents, without a single hidden gear. Spring arrived in Memphis the way it always does, sudden and unapologetic, the dogwoods erupting in white blossoms overnight, and the air turning sweet with magnolia and fresh-cut grass. 6 months had passed since the ashes of Julian's letter scattered across the recovery center garden. 6 months of slow, deliberate reconstruction, of gears being cleaned and reseated and tested one at a time until the mechanism could bear weight again. The smell of hickory smoke drifted across our backyard on Carr Avenue, rising from the old Weber grill I had owned since Naomi learned to walk. I stood over the coals with tongs in one hand and a cold glass of sweet tea in the other, watching the steam rise from the ceramic plates stacked on the patio table. The magnolia tree was in full bloom, its heavy white flowers releasing a perfume that filled the yard with the scent of something alive and unafraid. Roz was setting the table. Not with the efficient, cataloging movements of a woman maintaining a cover, but with the unhurried ease of someone who expected to be exactly where she was for a very long time. She had put on weight since the official retirement. Good weight. The kind that comes from sleeping through the night without one ear tuned to a frequency only operatives can hear. Her reading glasses were back on, perched on her nose as she arranged napkins, and the sight of them made me smile in a way that started somewhere deep in my mechanism and worked its way outward. No encrypted phones on the table, no secondary exits being mentally cataloged, no man in a charcoal suit monitoring the perimeter with obsidian eyes. Just plates and glasses and the ordinary, magnificent architecture of a Sunday afternoon. Naomi arrived at 2. Her car pulling into the driveway, with a confidence in the turn of the wheel that I recognized from the old days. Before, she stepped out wearing a sundress the color of Tennessee clay, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she was laughing at something being said by the man unfolding himself from the passenger seat. Marcus Chen, 33 years old. High school physics teacher at Central High, with ink-stained fingers from grading papers, and a smile that reached his eyes without detour or calculation. He was tall and slightly awkward in the way of men who spend their days explaining the laws of the universe to teenagers and have not yet learned to perform confidence for adult company. He carried a bottle of wine in one hand and a pie box from a Beale Street bakery in the other, and when he saw me, he shifted both items to one arm so he could extend his free hand. "Mr. Blackwell, it is a genuine honor to finally meet you. Naomi has told me, well, She has told me everything. Everything is a lot of weight to carry, Marcus, I said, gripping his hand. His palm was warm and slightly damp with nervousness. Honest sweat, the kind produced by a man who cares about the impression he makes, because the impression matters to someone he loves. Pull up a seat. I performed my inspection. It was involuntary now, as natural as breathing. I watched his eyes when he looked at Naomi. I measured the distance he maintained, the way he touched her arm or did not, the rhythm of his attention. I looked for the tells, the too smooth smile, the scanning gaze, the precision of a manufactured persona. I found nothing. What I found instead was a man who laughed too loud at his own jokes, who asked Roz 3 follow-up questions about her garden with genuine curiosity, who accidentally knocked over his wineglass reaching for the salt and turned the color of the sunset while apologizing. He was a mechanism with every gear visible. No hidden springs. No secret compartments. Just the beautiful, ordinary clockwork of an honest man. Over dinner, Naomi told us about her return to the emergency department. Part-time at first, then full shifts. The weight of the scalpel in her hand again. The steady rhythm of a profession that demanded precision and rewarded it with lives saved. She spoke about it with the authority of a woman who had reclaimed her identity from the wreckage and rebuilt it on a foundation she had chosen rather than one that had been chosen for her. As the sun dipped lower and the conversation turned quiet and easy, Naomi reached into her bag and produced a manila folder. Inside were documents, bearing official letterhead from a financial institution. She slid them across the table toward me. "I set up a trust," she said, her voice carrying no hesitation. "For Caleb. For the boy in Nashville. It is funded through my practice income. Enough for his education. Enough to give him options that nobody gave Julian." I looked at the documents. Theodore Caleb Voss. Beneficiary. The name still produced a dull ache behind my ribs. But the ache was different now. Less like a wound and more like the phantom pressure of a gear that had been removed, but whose absence the mechanism had learned to accommodate. He did not choose his father, Naomi continued. And he did not choose to be leverage. If I can break the cycle by giving him a future that does not require revenge to sustain itself, then something good comes out of all of this. Something that ticks forward, instead of counting down. Roz reached across the table and squeezed Naomi's hand. No words. Just the pressure of a mother's grip and the wet shine of her eyes in the evening light. It was the first physical contact I had seen them share since the hospital. The first touch that was not rejected or flinched from. A connection, fragile as spider silk, but present and real, and spanning the gap that 6 months ago had seemed permanent. Later that evening, after Marcus had charmed Roz into sharing her actual maiden name and Naomi had fallen asleep on the porch swing with her head on his shoulder, I walked to the front of the house. The old shop on South Main Street had been closed since my retirement 8 years ago, but 3 weeks prior, I had turned the key in the lock and stepped back inside. Cleaned the workbench, oiled the vises, polished the magnification loops until they gleamed. I had reopened. Not for profit, not for business, but because a clockmaker without a bench is just a man waiting for time to pass rather than participating in its keeping. I had begun teaching. Twice a week, neighborhood children filed through the narrow doorway and sat at the long workbench while I showed them the interior of a pocket watch, the anatomy of an escapement. The patients required to seat a balance wheel. Most of them would never repair a clock professionally, but they would learn that broken things can be fixed. That patience is a tool. That the smallest gear, properly placed, can make an entire mechanism sing. The mailbox held a single envelope when I checked it that evening. Postmarked Nashville. No return address, but the handwriting was young, uneven, the careful script of a child concentrating hard on forming each letter correctly. I opened it beneath the porch light. The letter was short, written in pencil, on lined notebook paper. Dear Mr. Blackwell, my name is Caleb. My mom says you fix clocks. I want to learn how to fix things that are broken. Can you teach me someday? I have a watch that used to be my grandpa's, but it stopped working. I think it just needs someone who knows how to listen to it. Your friend, Caleb. I held the letter in the warm evening air, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. From inside the house, I could hear Roz's laughter and the clink of dishes being washed. The magnolia scattered blossoms across the darkening yard, like white stars falling slow. The mechanism is finally sound. I whispered to no one and everyone. And for the first time in longer than I could measure, I believed it. There is a question people ask me now. When they learn what happened, they lean forward in their chairs, lower their voices, and say, "How did you forgive her?" They mean Roz. They mean the decades of silence, the second life she built beneath the life we shared, the funeral I attended for a woman who was watching from a van parked 3 blocks away. They want a clean answer. A moment of revelation, a scene where I looked into her eyes and something clicked, and the anger simply dissolved like sugar in warm water. I disappoint them every time. Forgiveness is not a moment. It is a practice. It is waking at 4 in the morning and feeling the old fury rise like bile, and choosing, deliberately, to set it down the way you set down a mainspring that is wound too tight. You do not ignore it. You do not pretend it does not exist. You acknowledge the tension, and then you release it, one tooth at a time, until the mechanism can turn again without shattering. I learned that from clocks. 47 years behind a jeweler's loop taught me that every broken thing wants to run again. The gears do not hold grudges. The escapement does not ask why it was overwound. It simply waits for someone patient enough to listen to its click, find the fracture, and file it smooth. God gave me that patience. I did not always recognize it as a gift. For most of my life, I thought it was merely stubbornness, a refusal to quit on a mechanism that everyone else would have discarded. But looking back now, from this porch, with the roses Roz planted last autumn, climbing the trellis and the sound of Naomi's laughter drifting through the kitchen window, I understand. Patience was preparation. Every stuck balance wheel, every corroded barrel, every impossible repair that kept me hunched over my bench until midnight was God's way of training my hands and my heart for the one restoration that mattered most. My family. We are not the same family we were before the casino. I would be lying if I said we were. Naomi still flinches when a door closes too hard. She still checks the locks twice. On difficult nights, she calls me at 2 in the morning and says nothing for a long time, and I hold the phone and breathe with her until her breathing slows. Marcus is learning this rhythm. He is a good man. He does not try to fix her. He simply stays, which is sometimes the bravest thing a person can do. Roz and I sleep in the same bed again, but there are nights when the distance between us feels wider than the Mississippi. Those nights, I remind myself of the mainspring. Release. One tooth at a time. She carries her own guilt like a pendulum weight, and I have learned not to add to it. We are old enough now to know that love is not the absence of damage. Love is the decision to keep the mechanism running despite the damage. Julian writes from federal custody. Short letters, careful handwriting, always addressed to Mr. Blackwell. Never Dad. Never Pops. I do not answer every letter, but I answer some. Naomi knows. She does not read them, and she does not ask me to stop. That is her own act of release, her own filed fracture, and I respect it. Caleb visited last month. Serena drove him down from Nashville on a Saturday morning, and he spent 3 hours in my workshop watching me disassemble a 17-jewel Hamilton pocket watch from 1941. He asked questions the way children ask questions, without pretense or agenda, and when he held the balance wheel up to the light and said, "It looks like a tiny heart," I had to turn away for a moment because the truth of it hit me somewhere below language. He is 7 years old. He has his father's jaw and his mother's careful eyes, and he carries none of the weight that Julian carried at that age. That is the victory no headline will ever report. That is the cycle broken, not with a dramatic explosion, not with a courtroom speech, but with a quiet Saturday and a magnifying glass, and a child who is allowed to be curious without being afraid. I think about Desmond Cray sometimes. Not with hatred. Hatred is a gear that turns nothing. It spins and produces no useful motion, only heat and wear. I think about him the way I think about a clock that was built wrong from the start. A mechanism designed to destroy itself and everything around it. He is gone now. The coroner's report said cardiac arrest 3 weeks after the trial. I read it once, set it down, and did not pick it up again. There is a verse I return to often. Be still and know. 4 words. The simplest instruction and the hardest to follow. Be still. Stop winding. Stop forcing the hands forward. Trust that the mechanism, if built on truth, will keep its own time. God does not promise easy time. He promises meaningful time. And looking back across 70 years, across a marriage that nearly killed me and a daughter who nearly died and a wife who rose from a grave she never occupied, I can say with certainty that every second was accounted for. Every gear served its purpose. Even the broken ones. Especially the broken ones. So if you are listening to this, and something in your own life feels overwound, feels ready to snap, I will tell you what I tell every apprentice who walks into my shop on South Main Street. Listen first. Find the click. Then be patient enough to fix what is broken, one tooth at a time. The clock is ticking. But here is the secret I have learned after everything. It is ticking towards something good. If this story moved something inside you, leave a comment below. Tell me what clock in your life needs inspection. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have not already, subscribe, because every week we bring you stories about families who refuse to break. The mechanism continues. I will see you in the next one.